am here to share with you the results from our first ever demographic survey. All right, so I'm going to dive into this presentation, and starting with just a quick overview of why did we do this. So again, hopefully you all have seen our, we did recently launch a web page on our website devoted to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We did a webinar on that a little while ago, kind of walking people through that. But this survey is part of our commitment to advancing racial equity and social justice. We wanted to have a better understanding of who we are as a community and as a field beyond, our traditional survey that Brad just shared. If we don't know who we are, we don't know who you are. How can we possibly do as good a job as we could to represent you and support you? So that's another piece. We also want to see, track these trends over time, looking for how things will change, obviously, from here forward, looking for changes across the state. We also want to compare ourselves to other stakeholders in the system, including students, faculty, classified professionals, trustees, and administrators. And then we want to examine ourselves at the IRPE group, our board, our staff, our consultants, and how well we are representative of the IRPE community at large. I have to say, I'm used to somebody else doing this, and so I almost said next slide to myself. So hopefully somebody gets a chuckle out of that. So who did we survey? So we did an internal survey, again, as I said, of our board, our staff, and our consultants, and then we also did the external survey of the IRPE professionals throughout the system. Internally, we got a 93% response rate, 100% of our board and staff, and 90% of our consultants. We've now made this a requirement as new people are coming on, that they need to complete the survey so that we have those records. And we administered the survey and got a 29% response rate among professionals. We unfortunately got a number of unusable surveys, in that they didn't answer the questions in a way that we could use the data. So we ended up with only 130 out of the 153 that we were able to use for the analysis. So I'm going to present to you the data in 3 different areas, starting with the IRPE community, then a comparison between the IRPE community and our board, and then a comparison of we call them internal members, but that's referencing the board, staff, and consultants combined, how that group compares with the IRPE community, and how they all both compare to other constituent groups in the system. So starting with our IRPE community, as some of you know, our board is represented by 12 regions. And these are the regions and the responses that we got in each region, including those that did not tell us which region. We did not ask people to identify their college. We only asked them to identify which region they were in, because obviously you start getting down to the college level and people telling you their race and gender, and you start to be able to identify people. So we felt that if we left it at the regional level, that it would be a little bit easier to mask and protect people's identities. So who responded to the survey? The majority of the people who responded were analysts, as you can see here. We asked people about their experience in IRPE, and we asked both from the perspective of how long have you been in IRPE in the system, in the California Community College system, and then how long have you been in IRPE anywhere, in higher ed or K-12 or any kind of institutional research position. And so what you see here is that the majority of the people who responded to the survey have been in the field, in either case, fewer than 10 years. That's the orange dots there. So we did have a small number of people who declined to answer, so they're not reflected here. But that is people who responded. And then next we did a crosstab of well, who are the people by their role and their experience. And so what we found is the executives, which are your vice president, vice chancellor level, were more likely to have 10 years or more experience. That stands to reason. Our analysts were more likely to have fewer than 10 years, also stands to reason. And their deans and directors were kind of evenly distributed between that more than 10 years or less than 10 years. So when we look at IRP experience by gender, so how does the experience, what we found is that females were more likely to be new both to IRPE in the community college system, but also the IRPE field in general. And you'll see here that there's some blanks there on the right side screen. That is for data suppression. But we wanted to acknowledge these are people. These people exist. And so even though we're doing data suppression, we wanted to add this to these slides to let you all know that we are not, and that's why we left it blank as opposed to just not showing them at all. So we're not giving you their answers, but we want you to know that they exist. So you'll see this on slides going forward. So we did look at LGBTQ+, and that people who identify in that community are more likely to be newer to the system, our community college system, but not necessarily to IRPE. Okay, and again, we had someone who declined to state, but this person exists, and we definitely want to acknowledge. So we asked a question about Ancestry, and this kind of walks you through. It's a little hard to read and complicated. And again, we are going to post this, not just this recording, but this file will also be on our website. But we wanted to kind of walk you through how, because the way we asked the question was a check all that apply. So we gave a list of different identities and let people check as many as they wanted. But for the purposes of trying to analyze the data, we came up with this particular methodology. So we started with the Hispanic or Latina OX. And if someone selected that, we put them in that category, very similar to other practices. After that, if anyone selected more than one, we put them in multi-ancestry group. And then we had disaggregated Asian. And then, just for the purposes of showing the data, you can see who we put into the Asian group, including our Filipina OX. The other ones were recoded based on people who may have marked something above that, are white, are African American, Black, Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander. And so you'll see the counts there. And then we did have a few people who ended up in the other category. So what does that all look like after we've done those calculations? So the people who have more than 10 years experience in the community college system were more likely to be Asian or white. Again, you can see by our numbers there on the right, we had to suppress the data because there were fewer than 10, but again, these people exist. They are out there. We just are not able to share their information. Then we looked at gender by position. And you can see here that our females are more likely to be analysts and males are more likely to be deans, directors, or coordinators. Right. Did this again for LGBTQ+. That community, members of that community are more likely to be deans and directors. And then we looked at ancestry by position. And what we found were the majority of our Asian respondents were analysts. The majority of our Latinx respondents were also analysts, and our white respondents were more likely to be deans and directors. Now here's one where we're comparing gender across the different constituent groups. And what you'll see here is that the RP group is more likely to be male than the IRPE community, but the IRPE community is more likely to be female than all the other constituent groups that you can see here. So let's look at the comparison of the board and the IRPE community demographically. So again, on the left, you have the IRPE community. On the right, you have our board. And what you can see here is that the IRPE community is more diverse than our board, but it's so there is some work for us to do there. When we look at gender, the board is more likely to be male than what you see in the IRPE community. When we look at LGBTQ+, equally as likely. We've got some parity there on this demographic. And then we also added position, looking at, well, who's on the board, by position. And you can see here that the board members are more likely to be deans, directors, coordinators than is represented in the IRPE community that responded to the survey, which may or may not be a surprise, given the work, most of the time you will have been around for a while before you might run for the board. But I'm going to circle back to this one in just a minute for implications. So when we look at comparing, again, our internal members, our community, and our constituent groups, when we look at it by race, the IRPE community is more diverse as the RP group, which we already said. But the IRP community's diversity is most comparable to that of administrators within the group, but none of the employee groups comes anywhere near the diversity of our students. Again, I don't think I'm telling this particular group anything that they did not know. This probably should not be a surprise. Again, when we look at the gender, I think this is a repeat slide that I didn't catch earlier. I apologize, but it doesn't hurt to say it twice. Again, it's the RP group, our internal members are more likely to be male than what you'll see in the IRPE community, but the IR community is more likely to be female than any of the other constituent groups, employee groups. LGBTQ, the RP group internally is a little more likely to be LGBTQ+ than what we see in the larger IRPE community. So that's what we have. And then just to kind of wrap things up, at least a couple of key takeaways for us, and curious to hear what you all may have, is that, right, as you saw with our response rate at 29%, we're not sure how representative this survey is of the entire field. I mean, 29%, if most of us are doing that kind of survey, we think that's a decent response rate. But if we want this to actually approach any kind of census level, we need a much higher response rate. And what was problematic is that there were certain places in the survey where we personally knew people that disputed the finding. So it's kind of one of those situations where it's like, wait, I know somebody who's this, whatever demographic that is, but they're not showing up in the survey, which tells me that that person didn't take the survey, right? And so we need to figure out ways to get more people to take the survey so that we can hang our hat a little bit more on this being representative of our field. And then, as I mentioned, we do have some work to do organizationally to increase diversity across all three of our internal groups, our board, our staff, and our consultants. So questions for you all. I'd love to hear anybody who wants to put something in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand. I think we're a small enough group. There are no breakout rooms. We did not plan that, so no need to check out. But we would love to hear, anything that kind of stood out to you in the data, anything you think we should be considering for board recruitment, and specifically, any thoughts you have about how we at the RP group, what role should or could we play in helping to diversify the IRPE community at large? And then ultimately, how do we get more people to respond to the survey the next time we do this? So please, I will pause here, and I will hope that anyone will start to use the chat or will raise their hand. We'd really, want to have some conversation. We want to hear from you. You've never seen these kind of data before, so I know there needs to be some processing, but please share. Hi, Tina.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you for sharing this. I do have a thought on the third bullet on helping to diversify. Small plug, at San Joaquin Delta College, we are getting ready to do some recruitment for research analysts. And I've been thinking about where to post the positions. And we usually post on our P group, Care, Air, and then try to find others, right? And wherever our college posts. But I know a lot about diversification has to do with where we recruit from. And a lot of those are kind of more internal, right? If you know, right, where to find IR. So maybe RP could help with, where to post these types of positions outside of our internal communities to better diversify our pools for people with the skills and talent that we're looking for.
That is great. Thank you, Tina. Really appreciate that. That is some conversation that we've had. Obviously, it kind of starts with yourself, right? And so we actually we have a self-assessment tool that we'll be planning to release in the fall, and look for a webinar perhaps at the end of July or into August to kind of share that. But we started with ourselves, and one of the first things we looked at was our own hiring practices. And through that equity lens using this tool. And that was at the top of the list. It starts with, well, who knows about it, right? But we also looked at, so that's kind of the recruitment part, right? But also needing to look at our hiring process, the interview process, and how arduous it is, looking at job qualifications. What kind of bar are we setting? Are we setting it unreasonably or inequitably high? Those kinds of things. And then also, you cannot forget retention. There's all kinds of research about people of color and women in kind of male-dominated fields to where, yeah, you let them in, but then you don't create an environment that they want to or can stay in. And so you lose them. So it can't just be recruiting and hiring. It has to also be retention. So that's what we're looking at internally. But to your point, what we're hoping to do is and one thing we've been talking about is how can we help the field with the recruitment, the hiring, and the retention of more diverse IRPE offices. So thank you, Tina. And I see some stuff in the chat, but let me see what's here. Other markers such as former community college students or moved to the district for the job, local hire versus non-local. Okay, yeah. I mean, that's actually a good question in terms of how many people, where did you come from? Right, I think all of us most of us didn't start in community college IR offices. I think more people are now that are coming in. This is their first job, like as an analyst or something. But I think those of us who've been around for a while, we had lives before the California community college system, or we had lives in the system, but not as a researcher. So I think that's a good question for us to think about as. And then how many of us have attended community colleges? I think I hear so many lovely success stories from alumni that would be interesting. So thank you, Luis. I appreciate that. And then Fred is sharing that he had good success posting with local universities, in psychology, sociology, public and business admin, graduate programs. I think are also a really good place to do that. So someone sent me a message about maybe offering some kind of a prize for completing the survey, like a prize drawing, and possibly even free RP conference registration. Just put your name in the hat and maybe you get to come to the conference for free. I like that. Thank you so much. I think we might be able to swing something like that. Okay, hi Bridget, sharing about retention, that is only one opportunity for positional growth, right? Yeah, there's only so many positions within IR, but how many of us know people who moved up through IR and are now VPs of instruction, student services, presidents of colleges, and moved on to other things. But that's a good point, Bridget, is that there's usually only kind of two levels in most IR offices. And so you're here and then you're here. And that's it. Then that's kind of the end. Hi, Rosaline. Good to see you.
Hi. One thought with regards to diversifying the field could be growing our own, starting with our own community college students. I mean, we serve really diverse student populations. And one of the things that one of my new analysts did this past semester is she audited a social sciences research course. And she ended up serving as like a mentor of sorts to a number of the students in the course. So this could be a really great way for us to introduce new students in the social sciences or other related fields to our work. You know, a lot of these students will go off and they'll transfer, and a lot of times they'll come back to their home for a variety of reasons. So, and then on the thought of increasing response rates in future surveys, you could have kind of a friendly competition among the regional representatives to see which regional rep can get the highest response rate, not number, but response rate within their region.
Ooh, competition. I didn't know you were so competitive, Rosaline.
I'm kind of competitive.
No, I want to talk about both of those ideas. Like an internship, as Bridget put in the chat, that's something that I don't know. I mean, I think it's come up, but I don't think we've spent any time really looking at what would that look like, and maybe finding a college partner to kind of start a program. Because I'm to ask you, I wish we had a poll. I would do a poll, but it takes too much to build them in the site. But maybe people can. I'm going to stop my share just so I can see people, and maybe you can use the reactions button. But thinking back, I know some of us, it was longer ago than others, but thinking back, how many of you, when you were in community college or college, undergraduate, let's just say any time in undergraduate, you knew you would be here today. You knew you were going to be, your goal, career goal was California Community College IRPE. Just raise your hand or put a check mark or a thumbs up or anybody. So Land's telling me no. Daisy says no. Lots of no's. Any yeses? Anybody knew when you were an undergraduate that this is it. This is what you were going to do. I'm looking for one check mark. Anybody? Right? Did it? Okay. So let's clear that one. Let me ask you another question. Did you know this job existed when you were an undergraduate? I've seen lots of X's. I still haven't seen one green, not one thumbs up, nothing. Just kind of didn't know it. All right. Well, that's who our students are, right? And I think most of us, at least in these jobs, you all can correct me if I'm wrong, we don't often interact with our students on a personal level, unless you have work study students, perhaps, right? Or you work with a club or something like that. So how would they know this job exists? They don't know we exist. They don't know what this Office of Institutional Research, or whatever your college calls it, effectiveness planning, all that. They don't know these jobs exist. So maybe what we can start doing is figuring out how to introduce it as an option for people, especially those who like statistics. Maybe we need to go into statistics classes and just introduce ourselves and say, hey, I got this pretty cool job, you know, and if you really like this class, this might be something you want to do. All right, Tracy, please.
Hey, Darla, I was actually going to recommend exactly what you had just said. So being more front facing in the way where we can go into stats classes. I'm not sure how many of your community colleges have research methods classes. I'm actually the individual that Rosaline was referring to. I audited sociology research methods, and I loved talking to the students and getting to know them and letting them know that how research can exist as a career path outside of academia. So talking to faculty and finding out whether you can go into their classes, whether for a couple of minutes, maybe some of them will be more receptive to you going in and giving a guest lecture, talking about how applied research careers manifest themselves and that they are occurring on our campuses. I think that would be really interesting for students.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially anything that's kind of in that research methods beyond statistics, because we all know that a lot of students are taking statistics because they have to. right? And although a lot of those students find that it's not as bad as they thought, some still struggle. I was one of them, believe it or not, at first. Teaching matters. I'll just leave it at that. But there may be some opportunities, especially in the, no offense to my math colleagues, but if you're taking statistics in psychology, sociology, business, you might be, interested in that field. And so they may be more interested in pursuing something like this. I think a lot of us have social science backgrounds, if I'm not mistaken. Danielle, please.
Hey, so yeah, this is exactly what I'm currently talking to my dean about doing. So I'm a former IR analyst from Chafee, and now I'm a full-time psychology instructor, and I teach most of our statistics and research methods classes. So my dean and I have been talking about trying to come up with some program where we can work on projects in the classroom where we get the students directly involved in the research process, where they're the ones who are helping to gather the information that then goes into creating the policy that affects them directly. So they're really pulling them into this process and helping them understand how things sort of work behind the scenes. It's this mysterious bureaucracy to them. So they get both understanding about how things work institutionally. They get to, hands-on experience with working with research and data. We get to tackle a backlog of projects that have been sitting in, the IR office that has been understaffed for so long. So I just heard back from my dean. We're working on getting funding to go through the summer to summer program and hopefully try to get some sort of program sketched out to get something like this underway so that students are getting directly involved in the process. So it's just super cool to hear that that's one of those ideas being thrown out.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Danielle. We may be reaching out to you just to let you know.
Of course, awesome. I would love to see this happen because, like I said, I didn't even know these jobs existed until I saw it and I thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want to do. And so we're potentially missing so many of those people. So
yeah. I mean, the challenge that I see, and some of you may have already thought this, but you don't, want to raise your hand or put it in the chat, which is we're all pretty overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so taking
too.
on extra, working with our faculty colleagues to try to start a program like yourself, or even if just visiting classes. I think that's something that we should take back as the IRPE group to figure out, well, how can we help? Is it holding up a model? Is it
it feels like this is a resource that is there. It's going to take a lot of work in order to get it effective and productive, but it's a resource that's worth tapping as our students themselves again.
Yeah, and you've also found a way not just to give to them, but to get something to help you with, like you said, your backlog of projects. So there may be a win-win there. So I said, I think we'll be following up to learn more about your program and how we might be able to spotlight you, highlight you,
awesome.
to be a model that others can look to and adapt. But it's a good point about the students on our campus and growing our own, and that I think I know I became a counselor originally because of seeing a counselor, right? And so I think there's a lot of students who they pick their career path based on an interaction or interactions they had, positively or negatively, with people, in their formative years. And I know I've done a bit of work with foster youth, and it's way more than half of them have career goals in the helping fields. They want to be social workers, they want to be psychologists, they want to be counselors of some kind because of people who help them along the way. So maybe there's something, if people knew we existed, if our students knew that we existed, if we put ourselves out there and to be that, role model and mentor, maybe we get more people interested in the field. And that is one way to definitely diversify. Anything else? This is fantastic. So glad we did this. You guys are awesome. I knew this was going to I knew I was going to get some really good ideas from you all. Anything else that stood out to you? Anything else you think that our P group can do? Any other ideas? I like the drawing. I think that's a good one that we're going to do in terms of trying to incentivize people, because that survey, just to clarify, the IRPE office survey, what Brad shared, that's one survey per college. So there's one person kind of filling that out to talk about the office. But the demographic survey was sent to individuals. So that's an individual survey that we want all individuals in the IRPE community to complete. There's something in the chat about piloting a nerdy IR pipeline. So I think it's making sure, like I said, reaching out, getting to know students, letting students getting to know you, and that they may go on to transfer and then go on to graduate school and then come back and serve at the college. I mean, how many of you, maybe you or you know people at your college who are former students at that college, right? So there's definitely a grow your own piece here that I hear. Okay, hi Hawk, how are you? Programming language. Oh, that's an interesting intersection. A lot of us did have to do programming at some point in our careers. I did it kicking and screaming, but I did have to do it years ago. It is a skill set that would be that's really helpful. So that might be another area to target in terms of growing our own and introducing ourselves to students, and not just introducing yourself, but you're really introducing this field, you know, that is growing. I mean, when I started, I don't know if there were any programs to, you know, like they have like IR like certificates now and degrees. I don't think they existed. I mean, I don't want to tell you guys how old I am, it's none of your business, but I've been around a long time, and those resources weren't there when I got here, put it that way. Thank you, Lan. Any other thoughts? Anything in the data that any surprises, or was it pretty much what you would have expected? Sounds like people weren't surprised by the results. Okay, well, I had one more slide I will share with you just to kind of let you know at least what our thinking was, and you've all added to that, which is we want to work to encourage more analysts to run for the board, and then do our best to support them so that they can do both, and to encourage their supervisors, those deans and directors, to support them in developing this leadership capacity. We also have 2 appointed positions so 12 of our board members are elected by their respective regions, but there are 2 positions on the board that we use, and where we appoint people, the board appoints people, and we will, you know, continue to use those to bring in more analysts to try to achieve that diversity. And then we also consider diversity and inclusion when we are appointing people for those positions. And then, as I mentioned, we already used our self-assessment tool internally to look at our hiring practices, and we have identified some of the steps that we're going to be taking when we do our next hiring process. Is we're going to actually start collecting applicant demographics, because that's a big piece of it, is that you don't know, and you don't know who applied, you don't know who got through kind of the first screening, and looking and tracking that to see if there are any issues and how equitable and diverse and inclusive we're being in those. And again, as I mentioned, looking at where we post, looking at the qualifications, and just looking at everything through that lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's what we have for you here today. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your summer.